Boker Tov, good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Abramson, Executive Vice President for Strategy and Impact at CJP. Thank you so much for joining all of us here in Boston for this extremely special conversation between our very own CEO, Rabbi Marc Baker, with esteemed political commentator, best-selling author, Emmy Award-winning producer, I can't even say this all in one breath, social entrepreneur, and most importantly to so many of us, friend to the Jewish community, Van Jones. I hope you all know, but in case you don't, at CJP, part of our mission is to bring you the best and the brightest, the content that will make you think a little harder and a little deeper about the things that matter most to us as a community. So throughout this year, you're here today for one conversation, but we will be bringing you so many more speakers and conversations with Marc and with others that should help you think differently, should challenge you. So today, as we listen to this important conversation, I personally hope you hear something that makes you think differently, that makes us all a little uncomfortable and makes us want to commit to staying in conversation with one another. As we listen to Marc and Van, we're going to hear about allyship, building bridges, the importance of asking these tough questions, and trying to get to a place of understanding through compassion. I want to welcome both Marc and Van, but I also want to make sure everybody knows what an incredible guest we have. Hopefully everyone knows how incredible Marc is, but let's just talk about Van for a minute. Van is a lawyer by training. He has dedicated much of his career to seeking positive solutions amid ideological conflict, finding common ground through empathy. It's kind of amazing to think of what if we lived in a world of people who wanted to do that. Van has engaged in policy making with Presidents George W. Bush, Obama, and President Trump, and has championed such topics as green jobs, criminal justice reform, allyship, human rights solutions to the opioid epidemic, and for us, and for all of us, confronting anti-Semitism. Van, we've heard you so many times in the last 15 months speak out against Hamas and the explosion of violence against Jews since October 7th. You've told us all that this has been a position that has cost you both personally and professionally. So here we are today through this conversation to thank you for your allyship. You do what all of us want to do. You build these bridges. You're leaning in rather than leaning out, and you are seeking moral clarity without shaming anyone. Thank you for being here with us, with Boston today, and with the Jewish community. And over to you, Marc.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your leadership and that beautiful introduction. And thank you all for joining us this morning. And Van, welcome to Boston. It's great to be with you.
I'm glad to be here as well. And I appreciate the kind words. Also, just want to say I've lost a little bit, but I've gained a lot more. You know, I think one of the things that I'm trying to get people to understand is in the only good thing about bad times, that's when you find all the good people, right? And when bad times happen, that's when you find all the good people. And the people who run off or scared don't do anything or turncoats, it's so good to know who those people are.
It's a clarifying time that we are in.
It's a very clarifying time. So
it's a clarifying time. And I say all the time, actually, when people ask me about my work and my life and this community, I say, you know, if we're going to be in really hard times, it's a blessing to be in it with great people whose hearts are in the right place and who just want to make a difference. So
I think that's right. And I just the danger of kind of amplifying too much. Like, I'm not the person that's in harm's way. You know, Jewish people are in harm's way. There are other people who are in harm's way, but I'm not. You know, I'm fine, and it's a blessing to be in this work. We've been together for 100 years, and we've had good days and bad days, and it's never been the vast majority of Black people loving the vast majority of Jewish people. Like, that's all. Like, no, it's always been a small number of people, you know, who really believe in repairing the world on the Jewish side, and a small number of Black folks who believe in justice for all, and it's some Black Jews in the middle trying to make it all work. And it's always been a small number. That small number has done amazing things for the past 100 years, and will do amazing things for the next 100 years. And in the meantime, to me, it's an honor to be an ally to people who've been an ally to me.
Well, we are super grateful for your allyship, and we're going to come back to Black-Jewish relations and how we can work together in a little bit. I want to actually just rewind since you started with yourself and just ask you to kind of tell us a little bit about your story. You know, you describe yourself as a progressive. Obviously, you're a well-known TV personality and political commentator and advocate, and you've launched so many different nonprofits and care about so many different issues. But just give us a little bit of, how did you come to be Van Jones?
I made up the name Van Jones in uh, 1986. Okay, so I was born in 68 in a small town, on the edge of a small town in rural West Tennessee called Jackson, Tennessee. When I say on the edge of a small town, um, so I was born in 68. That was the year they killed Dr. King. That's the year they killed Bobby Kennedy. That's the year that the Democratic Convention in Chicago was bloody. They were just trying to wipe out hope in America the year I was born. So, oh, all hope is lost. I said, well, they said that the year I was born, and we still had hope for the next half a century. So I'm not that easily cowed by any of this panic that's going on. But look, my dad grew up in segregation and poverty in Orange Mound, Memphis, the biggest Black ghetto in the South at that time. He was born in '44. Um, he grew up in a shotgun shack, my father, but he joined the military to get out of poverty. Most people in the '60s were trying to get out of the military. My dad went into the military so that he could get out of poverty. He got out, put himself through college, a small little Black college in Jackson, Tennessee called Lane College, and married the college president's daughter, my mother, because my dad had it like that. My dad was, he was a good-looking military guy, and so he was able to kind of catch the queen of the ball. And then they had me and my twin sister, and then my father put his little brother through college, my uncle Milton, who just retired from Memphis City Police Force, put a couple of cousins through college, basically got everybody out of poverty in my family, got out of poverty on this bridge called my father's back. And when he died, when he passed away, the picture they put of him on the funeral program was him standing outside of Yale Law School the day I graduated with his hands in the air. And, so I am Willie Jones' son, but Willie Jones did not name me Van Jones. He named me Anthony Jones. His name was Willie Anthony Jones. So he named me Anthony Jones. But when I got to college at the University of Tennessee at Martin, a little state school about an hour from my parents' house, I sat in the parking lot and I said, at the time I weighed like 130 pounds, 140 pounds. I said, if I go in this dorm, I said, if I go in this dorm and I say my name is Anthony Jones, it's going to be Tony Jones within minutes. And then it's going to be Bony Tony. I will be Bony Tony within minutes. I just know the juvenile mind. And so I've got to come up with a nickname for myself that I like, that can't get screwed up by these freshmen, college guys. And I wanted to be one syllable, like Prince or Sting. I wanted a one syllable name. And so I was like, oh, maybe I could be Jet Jones. No, I'm too slow for that. Oh, maybe I could be Rush Jones. Finally I got to Van Jones. And that kind of works. So I named myself Van Jones, and I did well in college. I was dating a young woman who was at Vanderbilt University. She's president of the Black Student Alliance at Vanderbilt. This is during the anti-apartheid fight, trying to get Nelson Mandela home from prison. And to keep up with her, I had good grades. I had shitty grades in high school. But I got amazing grades in college, trying to keep up with my girlfriend who was on her way to medical school. She's actually now a medical doctor. We're still good friends. Medical doctor in Chicago doing oncology for homeless women, like cancer, homeless women. So Monica was always way ahead. And by doing so well as an undergraduate, I wound up going to Yale for law school, and was heartbroken to find um, just a lot of elitism, for lack of a better term. The division in New Haven, Connecticut, as a kid from a small town was just shocking. You had kids doing drugs, which I hadn't been exposed to and still never have experimented with. But we had kids doing drugs on the campus and kids doing drugs in the community. I thought Jesus was going to send them all to hell, so I wasn't interested in any of it, being a Southern Christian kid. But um, the kids who were doing the drugs on campus, they would go to this rehab center on campus we had called mental hygiene. They got all kind of help and support. The kids doing the same drugs in the community were going to prison. I mean, as a kid from the backwater of the backwater, to see that, and we're being taught in law school about, liberty and justice for all and equal rights. I just went to the left side of Pluto. And when I got out of law school, I moved to the Bay Area. I became a left-wing berserkly activist. I was on the left side of Pluto. I was in every socialist, anarchist, Maoist, Trotskyist, any ist I could find group throughout my whole 20s. I was so pissed at the unfairness. And then in my 30s, I became a dad and started to calm down. And I started saying, listen, don't burn down the schools. I mean, my kids got to go there. Let's fix the schools. Let's start making things better. And then I ultimately realized I had a better talent for building bridges and burning stuff down. Not that I was ever actually an arsonist, but you have the two styles of politics. You just burn it all down and down with the system. I did that for a long time, 10 years or longer. But by the time I got to my 30s and my 40s as a dad, I realized I had a talent for bringing people together. And also, I realized something else too. My constituency, my kind of found adopted constituency, didn't have much. Homeless people, kids in jail, people at the very margins of society. And what a lot of progressives forget, the people who don't have very much, they need more friends and fewer enemies. Their problems are so big. You need conservative business owners to hire them. You need, progressive legislators to listen to them. You need the labor movement to try to take them in. You need people of faith to, lift them up. You can't solve the problem for people at the very bottom by offending everybody, insulting everybody, attacking everybody, blaming everybody, being more righteous than everybody. That might be good for you. You might get a grant or you might get an opportunity to go viral. It's not good for people who need a lot. My folks I care about need a lot. And so I developed the ability to work across the aisle and across economic groups to get support to, frankly, poor urban kids in Oakland and other places. And eventually wound up working for Barack Obama and on CNN and that sort of stuff. It all came out of, that grassroots work and realizing at the grassroots level, I was making myself feel very righteous, but I was hurting my ability to help people who needed me to be a bigger person than just a rabble rouser.
Hmm. Can I ask you, did you know, I mean, that's an amazing story, and hearing that moment at Yale when you saw the contrast between the two different demographics of drug users is really powerful. At what point did you know, like, I have a larger, higher calling and purpose to make significant change in this world?
I think maybe in kindergarten.
Ah,
You
you knew early. Okay, so you knew you were destined. You had a sense of ambition. You knew you had a purpose in the world. This wasn't just about one opportunity at a time.
Miss Brown, my kindergarten teacher, I remember being in her classroom, and there's this horrible little bully in my class named Patrick Carmody. I don't remember whatever became of this guy. He was terrible. But for some reason, he asked Miss Brown, who was Bobby Kennedy? Now, this is, 73, 74, whatever. And Miss Brown started crying in front of everybody. Now, up until that time, I'd never seen a grown person cry. I didn't even know adults could cry because I was like, stop crying, stop crying. I assumed that once you got to be an adult, you couldn't cry. And part of being an adult was not crying. And here she is crying in front of the whole classroom. Now, I realize now, like, what if, I don't know, Barack Obama had been shot and a child 5 years later asked who was Barack Obama? I would probably be overwhelmed with emotion. But at the time, it was a shocking experience. And then a couple weeks later, we have these things called weekly readers, these little nasty little newspapers that ink will come off in your fingers. And in one of the weekly readers, they had something about Bobby Kennedy. And so I had my little round scissors and I cut it out. I was allowed to, I asked, I was cut it out and I brought it home and I put it on my little cork board in my room. And I started getting very interested in Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy and Dr. King or whatever. So while other kids were interested in sports or music or cars or whatever, just from that very early on, I said, Jesus, now here's how the mind of a child. These guys got killed the year I was born. So I gotta somehow do something to make up for it. You never know what a child's thinking. And so literally my whole life, I was like, well, one thing I know I'm going to do, I'm going to be one of these guys that helps people and stands up for it. So there's no real origin story for me. Like from the very beginning, I was just disproportionately interested in that stuff. And look, there's 20 other kids in that classroom that saw the same thing and it had no effect on them. But for me, I can't remember a time that I was not interested in um, the people who were making the world better.
I love it, and it really resonates with me because I think all the time about standing on the shoulders of giants and what it means to inherit a legacy and what our responsibility is moving forward. That's really powerful.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, since you started talking about that kind of being a bridge builder versus someone who burns things down metaphorically. That's obviously countercultural today in a lot of ways. And I want to talk about allyship in a little bit with the Jewish community, but I want to talk more broadly about what it means to work together with people who may see the world very differently than you do. And you're obviously a deeply principled person, but so much of the change you have made has been by staying in relationship with people with whom you, I'm guessing, vehemently disagree. And in some ways, maybe in some cases, don't even share a moral worldview. How do you do that? Why are you so committed to that? Just talk a little bit about how you stay in those relationships.
Well, I don't know how you could get anything done otherwise. I mean, look, people are way off on this. Progressives in particular are way off on this. Maybe if there were enough, I don't know, middle class, middle aged, heterosexual Black guys in the world to fix everything, I could work with people who only look like me. This is a math problem. Before it's a moral problem, it's a math problem. There are not enough middle-aged, middle-class, Black heterosexual dudes to get everything done by ourselves. The problems I'm trying to solve are too big for that. And so inevitably, I'm going to have to work with people who are not me. It's a math problem. And so, and then beyond that, it's also a moral problem. Wouldn't it be just unlikely that all the good ideas are in one political party and all the good people are in one political party and all of the common sense and judgment and perspective are on one side of the aisle? Doesn't that go against the very thing we're committed to, which is that having a more diverse set of views, a more diverse set of eyes gives you better answers? Why is it that progressives are so passionate about that in every other context, except when it comes to the most important ideas around how to make a democracy work? I can't do my work if I'm only talking to liberals, because I won't have enough information. I just won't know enough. I'll be too dumb and I'll make a bunch of mistakes. And so I can count on my progressive friends to get some things right. We tend to focus on justice. We tend to focus on disproportionately on what about the people who've been traditionally left out, laughed at, left behind. So I can trust that we're going to have that preoccupation and all the good that comes from that preoccupation. The problem is if you focus on justice with no concern for liberty, you wind up with a nightmare, because suddenly you start saying, well, the only thing that matters is that the masses of people get this and the mass of people get that. But that individual person who might get overtaxed or might get chased out or otherwise mistreated, and that doesn't matter. The greater good. In other words, totalitarianism. In other words, communism. So justice without liberty is a nightmare. At the same time, I can trust my conservative friends to be very concerned about liberty. They're going to talk about individual dignity, individual rights. They're going to talk about limited government. They're going to talk about the importance of asking a certain amount of questions around fiscal prudence. How much does this cost? Who's going to pay for it? Is this even the proper role for government? And that's great. But you know what? Liberty without justice. If all you care about is maximizing individual outcomes through market mechanisms, ironically, over time, if you aren't concerned about who's getting left out, who's getting left behind, you wind up with a different type of totalitarianism, corporate domination. The private sector, through market forces, can become so all powerful that you wind up with monopolies. You wind up with all kinds of other problems. You can wind up with pollution. You can wind up with extreme exploitation of workers. And so liberty without justice is also a nightmare. And so that's why we need each other. That's why the children say in the morning they want a country with liberty and justice for all. That's the American formula. And these are two ideas that are actually antagonistic and by design, literally in the pledge of allegiance, liberty and justice. And so I've never seen a bird fly, in other words. I've never seen a bird fly with only a left wing. I've never seen that. Not even in Berkeley, California. I've never seen a bird fly with only a left wing. You know, I grew up in the rural South. I never saw a bird fly with only a right wing, not even in Alabama and Tennessee, where I grew up. We need each other. You need these two wings to fly. And when you know that, then I'm going to bring the full force of my progressive ideas to the conversation and then shut up and listen. Because I guarantee you I'm missing something. I guarantee you there's something I don't understand enough. And then when my conservative friends talk, I'm not listening from the point of view of you're a bigot and a Nazi and a cult member. And I'm not learning. I'm lecturing, which means at the end I'm going to be dumber than I could be if I had just shut up and listened. And so this is a deeply, I'm not bipartisan just because it sounds good. Right now, doesn't sound good at all. Everybody's hyperpartisan. I'm bipartisan because I can't learn enough if I don't listen to other people. I can't help enough if I don't listen to other people. And much more importantly, if I'm mad at my opponents for being intolerant, and I am intolerant of them for their intolerance, now I am becoming what I'm fighting, and worse, I'm feeding what I'm fighting, and I'm making it much less likely that we're going to have an outcome where people tolerate each other's differences. So I don't understand, Mark. I'm not trying to be, I'm literally confused by what progressives are doing. We've had 5 movements in a row, Mark, on the left that have dehumanized somebody in the name of rehumanizing somebody else. Me Too, Black Lives Matter, the anti-billionaire stuff from Bernie Sanders, a lot of the environmental movement now. If you're a traditional energy person, I'm going to put you down. Even if you're a sick, poor coal miner, you're killing the earth. I hate you. And now you get to the Jews. It's literally just a pattern. In order for me to lift up women, I got to put down men. To lift up blacks, I got to say all whites are racist. To lift up the working class, I got to put down billionaires. To lift up the environmentalists, I got to insult people who work in traditional energy. And now every Jew is a colonizer. Uh, Jews can be raped or butchered, it doesn't matter. This is not Dr. King. This is not Nelson Mandela. This is not Fannie Lou Hamer. It's not uh, uh, Ella Jo Baker. This is not the tradition of Black civil rights, dignity for all, love for all, care for all. Uh, that's not what that is. And so I have no trouble rejecting that. And that's not my tradition. I come out of a very different tradition. And this pattern now for 10 years of progressives just demonizing and putting down one group of people in the name of lifting somebody up, I reject in its entirety. It's not special to my Jewish friends. I reject it in its entirety. And I believe we have to find a better way. I'm not saying all lives matter. And no. There are special concerns and considerations, but they have to be dealt with in a kind way, in a deeply humble way, in a way that allows for grace and for gratitude and for an outcome that's worthy of everybody, and not this dehumanizing polarity that progressives are equally guilty of imposing on society.
I think first of all, it's beautifully said, the reduction of the world into these polarities and these binaries, the simplification also of identities and stories and history, which also to me is incredibly anti-liberal, I see it as an existential threat to our democracy and to our humanity. It sounds like you do as well, not to mention the fact that it's incredibly impractical and does not enable us to get anything done. Do you see hope in this moment? Like, how are you making sense of this moment we are in politically and socially? Are you finding others who you think want to reject that and kind of chart a new path forward? You know, how hopeful are you about rebuilding that kind of center in the spirit of Dr. King's legacy as you described it?
You know, over the course of the next week, not so hopeful. Over the course of the next decade, quite hopeful. So, you know, we'll go through some difficulties here, and that's okay. I think I try to point out to all my friends who right now are, you know, freaking out and for good reason. I mean, there's enough going wrong, no matter what political party you're in. There's enough going wrong to be very concerned. Um, you know, and you know we've had now what, 3 change elections in a row or more. 2016, people voted for change. 2020, they voted for change. 2024, they voted for change. And every time, like, I don't think we're in a left-wing period or a right-wing period. I think we're in a turbulent, volatile period. And there are people, good and bad, who will rise in a turbulent, volatile period. I think, you know, in 2020, things swung too far in one direction without enough love, without enough care, without enough wisdom, without enough kindness. And so in that Black Lives Matter moment, the COVID moment, um, uh, 4 years of bottled up frustration with racial injustice came out in a very, very scalding way. And we had 30 million white people who raised their hand and were willing to march in a pandemic for Black people. That never happened in human history. And but the Black left wasn't prepared to lead that. I certainly wasn't prepared to lead that. I think we spent so much time case making for the problem of anti-Black racism that we never really thought through, well, what if Black Lives Matter became overnight the biggest white movement for racial justice in the world? Black Lives Matter was the biggest white movement for racial justice in the history of the world. If you look at those pictures, you look at those rallies, there's a lot of white people out there. We weren't prepared to lead that. We hadn't been thinking through the moral and ethical implications of having, you know, tens of millions of people in a movement for racial justice. And so the ideas we put forward were too small, you know, or too foolish. You know, the Black Lives Matter chapter in Los Angeles, they've been battling with the LAPD over funding and all kinds of just gross improprieties on the part of the LAPD, had a slogan. Their slogan was defund the police. Now, that slogan should have been defund the LAPD. That's really what they were talking about. But that suddenly becomes a global slogan. Well, that's a foolish slogan. And the people who think it's the most foolish are Black voters who rejected it, you know, overwhelmingly and elected, you know, Mayor Adams here in New York. But you had a very small movement of very young people, you know, in tiny chapters. You know, Black Lives Matter chapters about this big in Chicago, this big in LA, this big in New Haven, Connecticut, very small. And suddenly overnight, they're at the head of a movement bigger than Dr. King's. Dr. King never had 30 million white people to help it. Never. Okay. And so people didn't know how to deal with that. As a result, um, you know, all white people are racist. You're all racist, no matter what. You're subconsciously racist or consciously racist, which makes sense in small circles among friends who understand what we need. But you put that out on a broad scale, you offend a lot of people. And so we just weren't prepared. That's all. And so then you wind up with this kind of scalding politics, and not just on race, but also on gender and everything else. And people, and it created a pandemic called Why Try? That was a pandemic. No matter what I do, you're still going to call me a toxic man, a toxic man. No matter what I do, you're going to call me a racist white person. No matter what I do, you're going to call me some name. No matter what I do, my words are going to be overly policed. So when I'm trying to say something, if I don't say it right, you're going to make me feel bad. Why try? Why try? And so you saw this why try virus rip through society. And then others took advantage of it, and we are where we are. That's okay. That's okay. Movements make mistakes. Movements have setbacks. People say it wrong. They overreach. They. So over the course of decades, you learn, you come back, you figure things out. But over the course of an election, you might feel terrible. And so I think that what's going on right now is colossal in terms of what Donald Trump has been able to achieve. Um, Let me just give Donald Trump his due. It is very difficult to do what Donald Trump has done. How do I know? Look at everybody else in American politics over the past 100 years. It's hard to uh, take over your party as an outsider. Very difficult. In 2016, two people tried. Bernie Sanders tried in our party and was defeated. In 2016, same year, Trump tried in his party and won. Bernie was in a much better position to win against the Clintons in 2016 than Trump was, but he pulled that off. Very impressive. Once you take over your party as an outsider, it's very hard to then win the general election. How do you know? Look at Barry Goldwater in 64. He took over the party, but then Johnson creamed him, which is why everybody assumed that after Trump took over the Republicans, Hillary Clinton was going to cream him. No, he won. Very difficult. Very difficult to govern once you've taken over your party as an outsider. But, you know, I didn't agree with everything Donald Trump did, but he was able to govern effectively until COVID. Very, very, very impressive. Then it's almost impossible once you've been defeated to come back. How do you know? Out of 57 presidents, only two have done it. One's Grover Cleveland and one's Donald Trump. This is a very impressive political athlete. And now he's come back in. 4 years ago, Democrats had the House, the Senate, the White House, and Silicon Valley. Now Donald Trump has the House, the Senate, the White House, the popular vote, the Supreme Court, and Silicon Valley. This is a colossus. This is a phenomenal achievement in American politics. I disagree with him on 99% of what he's doing. But the only good thing you can take away from that is if that can happen in 4 years, something else could happen in 4 years and probably will. And so we have to take as a Democrat, as a progressive, and I know most people here maybe have other views or may have other views, but you got to take your beating. If you um, don't have at a grassroots level a politics of beauty and inclusion and love and grace, people aren't going to stick around. You're going to have a lot of infighting, which is the other untold story. A lot of infighting on the left, a lot of canceling on the left, a lot of people tearing each other apart on the left. So we're too weak to fight. Too weak to fight. If you have political leaders who are not honest, I love Joe Biden. I worked for Joe Biden in the Obama White House, but clearly there was some dishonesty going on about his capacity. If you do that, you got to pay a price. If you don't if you push out all your rebels, RFK Jr. was a rebel. We pushed him out. Joe Rogan was a Bernie bro. We pushed Joe Rogan out. Elon Musk was an Andrew Yang Democrat who loved Michelle Obama. Biden wouldn't even talk to him because he wasn't unionized. We pushed him out. So if you have a grassroots movement that's not beautiful based on grace and gratitude, if you have political leaders who lie to their own base, and if you punish every dissident and push them out, at a certain point, you're going to be too small to win, and you're not going to deserve to win, and you're going to lose. That's what happens. And then from there, you got to be honest about those mistakes, and then you got to begin to rebuild.
So much to unpack about that answer, about actually the kinds of politics we need to pursue going forward. But I'm going to move us actually to another topic, which is I want to talk a little bit about allyship, Black Jewish allyship, and your journey of being a friend to the Jews. Let me just say, as you alluded to at the beginning, even talking about Black Jewish allyship, we got to be careful because obviously the Black community is not homogeneous. The Jewish community is not homogeneous. And there are a growing number of Jews who identify as Jews of color in our community. So we've got a Venn diagram of relationships here. But I want to take us back to a moment that many of us remember, which is thousands of us from Boston traveled to DC over a year ago in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre. And it was a obviously deeply traumatized time, both for what was going on in Israel, but also because many of us were worried and already feeling like our allies here in the States were going to abandon us. And we were already feeling kind of thrown out, in particular of progressive spaces, honestly, and just wondering kind of who is going to stand with us in this moment. I mean, the notion that this outpouring of anti-Semitism here in the States followed that massacre is so impossible to comprehend. And I say this as a leader in the Jewish community, as someone who's grew up in this country, and also as a father of someone on a college campus. Like, it's hard to get our head around. And yet you stood up there on that stage as a deep ally and friend to our community. And I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of what has motivated you to stand with us. And especially at a time when so many people don't seem to understand the Jewish story or empathize with it.
Well, well, I'm not stupid. Let's just start with that. um, I don't even know how to answer your question. I mean, look, that was a very frightening day for me because um, I got the call to be a part of the march. At the time, the march was called the March Against Anti-Semitism to Free the Hostages and for Israel. Now, I'm not the kind of person who's going to march for a country. I wouldn't even go to a march, like march for the United States, like or march for Mexico or march for any country. So marching for countries, not really my thing. But those first two, against anti-Semitism and the hostages, I'm all there. By the time I get off the plane, it's been abbreviated to March for Israel. And the internet is going crazy. Van Jones is going to go to the March for Israel. Now, that's not a happy experience for me because, again, I'm just not that kind of guy. I'm not going to be marching around for countries, especially countries in the middle of wars. But go to bed, wake up, and my phone is just blowing up. Just people, is this true? Is it like an internet rumor? Blah blah blah. You need to issue a statement that you're not blah blah. I've done all kind of stuff. I've gone into all. I mean, I've gone to Mozambique. I've been in federal prisons helping people. I mean, so I've been shot at in Oakland. I mean, I've never been more scared because people who I know and love and respect are texting me saying, "You can't do this. If you do this, you're going to be, seen as someone who doesn't care about Palestinian children being killed." Blah 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 blah. My armpits were itching. My underwear was wet. I was literally terrified because nobody wants to be misunderstood by their friends. And I thought to myself, I came up with a great idea. I said, I'm gonna say I have COVID, right? Like, how do I get out of this thing? And then I started thinking about it, and I said, this is a world historic moment for the Jewish community. 3,000 years, 4,000 years, getting chased out of every country, having to sleep with a go bag ready to go just in case, never fully at home anywhere, culminating with the Holocaust, which has no historical peer in its brutality and calculation. Finally, finally get a homeland that's this fucking big, that's like smaller than Phoenix County. Phoenix County is bigger than the entire homeland. There's only 15 million Jews left in the whole world. There's a billion plus Chinese, a billion plus Africans, a billion plus Indians. There's 15 million Jews left in the whole world. Half of them live in Israel. Half of them are people of color. And this is a world historic moment of vulnerability for Jewish people. And this is a community that singularly stood with us when it was very hard. Not every Jew. In fact, most Jews didn't do anything during the civil rights movement. And frankly, most Black people didn't do anything during the civil rights movement. It was a small number of Jews, a small number of Blacks. We stood together and we saved American democracy. We deepened it, we defended it. We created what we now call the American Republic that was disproportionately created by Blacks and Jews together on the front lines, risking our lives. And now this moment of incredible vulnerability is going down. What if no African Americans show up? What does that do to human capacity over the next century for collaboration for justice, for collaboration for democracy, for collaboration for peace? It would be an unforgivable sin by my community against the Jewish community in this moment. I don't have the right to sit here in my hotel room and make up stories and try to protect myself from Twitter. So I got in the elevator, got down, hit the street, and my knees were literally shaking as I started walking toward that rally. And then I started hearing the singing. Now, I have to admit, I like Jewish people, but I haven't spent a lot of time in Jewish communities, so I had never heard those songs before. I never heard anything like that before. But I recognized that this was like in my community when we're hurting and we're singing those gospel songs. You don't have to know the words to know the meaning. And I started striding a little bit more bold, because I'm coming home. I've been here before. I know what this is. And then Rachel comes, Hirsch's mom, who of course I didn't know from Adam's House Cat, and she said, "They have my boy." They had to hold me back from the stage, man. I said, I'm not gonna get tricked. This is not the time to let go of your friend's hand when they're hurting. I don't have to agree with any government decisions of mine or anybody else's, or any politician, mine or anybody else's. So no, I'm not gonna let go of Rachel's hand in the middle of this. So look, man, that's the proudest thing I've ever done. Because it was hard for me. I was, oh, you're so courageous. No, I wasn't. I was scared like shit, man. I was terrified because I wasn't, I'd already gone through the thing with helping Donald Trump get 40,000 people out of federal prison. Everybody mad at me. I've already been canceled by the right, canceled by the left. I don't like that shit. It doesn't feel good. I got low self-esteem. I don't want people mad at me. But at a certain point, man, you don't have the right to disrespect Dr. King and disrespect all of the people from our communities that have stood together and run for the hills because of some idiots on Twitter. And I tell you what, I was immediately rewarded because honestly, Mark, this is going to offend some people, but I obviously say what I mean. Jewish people know a lot more about Black people than Black people know about Jewish people. Okay, like Jewish people study civil rights, they care about Black causes, they give to Black candidates. They really know a lot about our community. We don't know anything about Jewish community. Because for us, like it's just like a bunch of white people, and some white people are cool, some white people are not cool. We don't realize, no, there's just a lot of Jewish people who are helping us who look white. Like, so we don't know that much. And so even though I was up there and I was doing my best and I was trying to speak up, I didn't know that much. I immediately met a woman named Amanda Berman from Zioness. She had a hat on that said Zioness, and I thought it was a cool hat. And we started talking, and thank God I met her because the level of education that I did not have about, I mean, I knew the big stuff, again, like, but I didn't. There's so much you have to learn. And so I was so lucky that I had someone like Amanda Berman and Zioness, and she was working with the Hav Fellows, who are all Black Jews. So suddenly now I'm being mentored by Black Jews. I'm being mentored by young Zionists who understand all the ways that the progressive left has gotten infected with all this BS. And so as soon as I came off that stage, I got a PhD level education from Amanda Berman, Zioness, Zahav Fellows. So then I was now I'm like, okay, wait, hold on a second. There's a plan here that Iran has to trick my community into attacking our only friends. That's all that's going on that I need to be focused on. And I'm just not going to let that plan go down without some opposition. But I just want to say, you mentioned it. I didn't mention it. You mentioned that, March. That was the thing I'm the proudest of in my life and public work. Working with the Trump administration to get 40,000 people released from federal prison because my base hated it and I got beat up for it. And going to that march because my base hated it, I got beat up for it. But I gained so much more in terms of understanding the ways that even well-intentioned people, because Black people are very well-intentioned, we're just an anti-war community. It's not, we Dr. King and Muhammad Ali didn't support the Vietnam War. When W went into Iraq, 80% of white folks supported W. 80% of Black folks opposed W. We are a very anti-war community. We're the most anti-war. And people are trying to use that anti-war goodness for bad purposes. It's too complicated for it to be, once again, just reduced. That didn't start with this conflict. It's been a pattern on the left now for 10 years. And so when you take that pattern on the left, the lack of education about the Jewish community, the lack of knowledge about the history, it's a perfect storm for Black folks to be pulled into something that if we knew the full of it, we could play a more constructive role. Of course, we love our Muslim sisters and brothers. Of course, we love our Jewish sisters and brothers. Of course, we love our Palestinian sisters and brothers. Of course, we love our Israeli sisters and brothers. From there, we can be helpful. But if you get pulled into some other agenda, you can't be. So long answer to a short question, but I just want you to have an understanding of, how I have, I've been blessed beyond measure. And if anybody knows Zioness, send them contributions of love and prayers because they're doing the hard work of getting people like myself who are in deep and progressive communities the tools to be effective and not to be used by geopolitical adversaries.
Thank you. I am familiar with that really important organization. And listen, we saw you up there on that stage and we knew and felt your allyship. But after that story, just on an incredibly deep level, thank you. And, you said it wasn't courageous because you were so scared, but we all know that it's only courageous when your knees are shaking. So thank you for modeling courageous leadership, courageous allyship. That's a story that I think is actually going to go down in the history of the relationship between our two communities. We got a little time left. Let's talk a little bit about moving forward. You described, I think, powerfully the way that external nefarious forces drive friends apart from one another, right? Literally manipulate us into turning on one another. And it doesn't help when we don't really know or understand one another and aren't proximate enough to one another. What do you think is when you think about the path forward, if we want to deepen and strengthen the relationships between our communities, both in the name of humanizing one another, supporting one another, standing with one another, but also getting good stuff done for one another and for this country, thoughts on what we need to do to strengthen this relationship?
Look, this is very delicate work because two things are happening. that are not good. If you're Jewish, whether you're, it doesn't matter if you're right wing, left wing, white, black, brown. If you're Jewish, you can see the anti-Jewish, anti-Israel current in the Black community that's strong and loud, and we have to stop that. But what you may not have eyes for is what, from our point of view as Black folks who are not Jewish, is an anti-Black current in the Jewish community. It calls itself anti-woke, anti-DEI, etc. I want to just remind people that the DEI in particular, these little shitty programs, these little shitty DEI programs have not really delivered that much to Black people. Okay? Like billions and billions were pledged to the Black community after George Floyd. Very little money ever actually materialized. The main thing that happened was, some mostly African American women got some jobs they were supposed to try and deliver. All those people are now being laid off, fired. And you have to remember the Black community is still in great pain. Just because some activists pissed off a bunch of people doesn't mean that our schools are any better. Doesn't mean that our unemployment rate is any better. Doesn't mean our health is any better. All of the pain and suffering that moved people 4 years ago and the Jewish community for 100 years plus, those problems are still there. And possibly worse now because all these programs are being taken away. Here comes AI. You have extreme pain in the Black community. And so then when you say, well, I'm so mad about DEI, I'm so mad about woke, I'm going to attack all that. Well, hold on a second. If you want to take away some of those programs or make them less extreme or make them more inclusive, that's perfectly fine. But right now, it looks like you got people in the Jewish community that are really pissed off about the chemotherapy and don't give a damn about the cancer. They're really pissed off about the remedy, DEI, but don't give a damn about the cancer, which is massive, obvious racial injustice still, and lack of opportunity still, and pain in the Black community still. So now, this is very delicate now because what I say to my Black friends who say, well, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm just pro-Palestine. I said, well, hold on a second. How would I know the difference? How would I know the difference? What have you said or done supportive of Jewish people, supportive of Jewish life, acknowledging Jewish vulnerability that would let me tell the difference between you and an anti-Jewish bigot? Because you have a responsibility to make it crystal clear to anybody that whatever your concerns are about the children of Gaza, which we all share, you are not a part of an anti-Jewish, anti-Israel movement. And if you haven't said anything, and I can't tell the difference, then we still have a problem. And I'll say the same thing to my friends on the Jewish side, who are mostly the people who are not Black, who are Jewish. You say, well, I'm not anti-Black, I just hate all this woke stuff. I'm not anti-Black, I just hate all this DEI stuff has gone too far. This DEI stuff is teaching people to hate Jews. Okay, great. We could fix the EI or replace it with something better, but you say you're not an anti-Black bigot. How can I tell the difference? What are you saying? What have you said in the past year that shows you have any concern for what's going on to poor Black kids on the streets of Baltimore, poor Black kids on the streets of Chicago, that now, because there's no affirmative action, have even less of a shot? If you say you're not an anti-Black bigot, how would I know? How would I know? You see? So we have to call each other back up to real allyship and not let the heartbreak on either side accelerate ourselves to now there's a concern that Black people are being used by Iran and other geopolitical adversaries for their purposes. And we have a concern in the Black community that too many Jews are now being used by absolutely unapologetically anti-Black forces. And if you don't want us manipulated by enemies, make sure you're not being manipulated by enemies as well. This is the reality that we're in. And but why should we go through all the pain and suffering of it? We are the people, when we come together culturally in a positive way, we create a double helix of hope. The cultural DNA of the Jewish community is to repair the world. And 3,000 years, 4,000 years of absolute horror, you never let go of that. You still, as soon as the boot came off the neck of the Jewish community, what'd you do? You created a state for yourself, which everybody else has. You created a middle class for yourself, and you started helping everybody. The most charitable, generous community in the world. As soon as you got the boot off your neck, that's important for humanity, not just for Jewish people. And the cultural DNA of the Black community at our best is justice for all. Not justice for some, justice for all. When you take the best of the Black community, because everybody in the Black community doesn't believe in that, but the best do. Everybody in the Jewish community doesn't really believe in repairing the world, but the best do. When you take the best of both and put them together, you get a double helix of hope for humanity. And we have to put that back together. The payoff is Jewish people need more friends and fewer enemies. Black people need more friends and fewer enemies. Black Jews need both sides of their family to stop fighting. And the world needs hope. And so restoring and renewing the Black-Jewish alliance, it was never as big as people pretend, but it was more powerful than people knew. If you put that back together, there's not just hope for Blacks and Jews and for Black Jews, there's hope for everybody in the world. If you pull it apart, there's less hope for everybody.
First of all, we did not necessarily plan this, but we happen to be right in the middle of the weekly Torah portions of the Exodus from Egypt. You gave us a Devar Torah and incredibly powerful words, since that story in many ways taught both of our peoples and arguably all of Western civilization the message of hope. And by the way, I'll remind us that we leave Egypt not just to leave Egypt, but in order to be, as you said, called to a higher purpose at Sinai. I mean, I love that idea of maybe we spend a little less time on looking at who we can call out and instead call ourselves and one another together and up and out to be the best of ourselves and to build a better future together. What a powerful message. And I hope that this will only be our first conversation and that we can find ways to work together and build together, because God knows we need it, and there's a huge opportunity ahead. Man,
look, I'm in, brother.
I have to wrap us up because it's 9:29. I am so grateful to you for the time this morning and for your courageous allyship. And again, that you are one of the folks who believes in this country, believes in our humanity, and is committed to working together to build something better for all of us. And we want to be in it with you. I want to thank everyone for being here this morning and for joining us. As Sarah mentioned when we started, CJP will continue to offer opportunities to have conversations like this, deep and emotional conversations, also complex and challenging conversations, so we can learn more about ourselves and our world and to explore together how we can build a better future. I hope you'll join us in person. Virtually, we'd love to hear from you. There's going to be a survey in the chat. Please take it so we can continue to improve these experiences. And again, wishing everyone a peaceful Shabbat. And of course, praying for the safe return of the hostages. Thank you, everyone.